Winter 1940. The war in the West was silent, but in the North, the world was shifting. Norway, long neutral, proud, and peaceful, found itself standing between two giants. Its fjords were deep, its ports ice-free, and its location priceless. Whoever held Norway controlled the North Sea and the route to the Atlantic. Beneath its frozen soil lay another treasure, the port of Narvik, through which iron ore from Sweden fed the German war machine. Berlin knew this. So did London. For months, both sides watched Norway with the same cold intent, one to invade, the other to prevent it. Yet Norway believed neutrality could save it again, as in the last war. Its army was small, its defenses minimal, and its faith in peace unbroken. But the North was not asleep. Beneath the Arctic winds, convoys moved at night. German freighters disguised as merchants sailed toward Norwegian waters. On board were soldiers, weapons, and orders marked Weserübung. Exercise, Weser. The operation was simple and daring. Conquer Norway and Denmark in one strike before the Allies could react. While the diplomats in Oslo spoke of sovereignty, the storm was already forming beyond the horizon. In the chill of early April, the Arctic frontier was about to ignite. The plan for the invasion of Norway was as audacious as it was precise. On April 9, 1940, at dawn, Germany would launch simultaneous landings at Oslo, Bergen, Trondheim, Narvik, Kristiansand, and Stavanger, all key ports spanning the Norwegian coast. Each strike was synchronized by radio, air, and sea, coordinated with mathematical perfection. To mask the assault, Hitler's fleet sailed under false flags, pretending to be peaceful merchants. Inside the holds were thousands of troops, armored cars, and Luftwaffe units ready to seize airfields within minutes of landing. Denmark, too, was part of the operation. At sea, the Royal Navy scrambled too late. Fog and confusion ruled the waters. German destroyers, heavy cruisers, and even the battleship Blücher slipped through the fjords under darkness. The invasion of Norway had begun. For the first time in modern warfare, a combined assault by air, land, and sea unfolded in perfect unison. The age of blitzkrieg had reached the Arctic, and Norway was its next victim. The morning of April 9th arrived like thunder. The German cruiser Blücher, leading the naval group bound for Oslo, advanced through the narrow Drøbak Sound. Norwegian coastal batteries opened fire, the first shots of resistance. Shells tore into the ship's hull, setting it ablaze. Hundreds of German soldiers drowned in icy water. For a brief moment, it seemed Norway had halted the invasion, but the victory was fleeting. Luftwaffe bombers soon roared above Oslo, dropping their deadly cargo. Paratroopers descended near the city's airfields, cutting communication lines and seizing control of the skies. The Norwegian government, caught unprepared, fled north toward Hamar, taking with them the nation's gold reserves and their oath of resistance. King Haakon VII refused to surrender. "I will not abandon my country," he declared, words that would echo through the occupation years. By nightfall, Oslo was under German control. The Nazi flag rose over the capital as silence fell upon its streets. The Arctic Blitz had begun, and Norway's fate was sealed in smoke and snow. Far to the north, the small port city of Narvik became the focus of the world's attention. It was the lifeline of Germany's war industry, the exit point for Swedish iron ore that kept Hitler's tanks moving. To the Allies, cutting that supply meant striking at the enemy's heart. On April 9th, German destroyers sailed into Narvik harbor and unleashed their troops. The Norwegian garrison, outnumbered and unprepared, fought bravely but was overwhelmed. Within hours, Narvik was under German control. But the victory came at a cost. The Royal Navy soon arrived, and the fjord turned into a graveyard of steel. In a series of brutal naval battles, British destroyers ambushed and sank nearly all 10 German destroyers trapped in the icy waters. The sea boiled with fire and oil. Meanwhile, Allied troops, British, French, and Polish, landed to retake the town. It became one of the fiercest Arctic battles of the war. For the first time, German troops were pushed back. Narvik fell to the Allies in early May, but the triumph was short-lived. Events unfolding in France would soon erase any hope of holding it. Above the fjords, the Luftwaffe ruled the air. German bombers swept across Norway's skies, destroying communication lines, railways, and ports. The Norwegian Air Force, with barely 100 outdated planes, fought valiantly, but was annihilated within days. British and French squadrons tried to support from distant bases, but the weather and distance made coordination nearly impossible. In Trondheim, entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. In Stavanger, airfields burned like torches in the snow. For civilians, the war arrived with a roar from above. Families fled into mountains, hiding in caves and forests. Entire villages vanished under firebombing raids. For the Germans, air power was not just a weapon, it was theater. Every bomb was meant to terrify as much as destroy. And in that terror, resistance began to crumble. By late April, Norway's skies no longer belonged to its people. The Arctic Blitz had claimed the heavens. While Oslo and the southern ports fell, Norway refused to surrender. Across the jagged fjords, small units of soldiers, fishermen, and civilians turned their homeland into a maze of defiance. They had no tanks, no air force, barely any rifles, but they knew the land. In the valleys near Gudbrandsdal and Österdalen, Norwegian troops ambushed advancing German columns. They used avalanches as weapons, blocking mountain passes and trapping convoys beneath tons of snow. The frigid terrain became their ally, and for the first time since the invasion began, the Germans slowed. The British arrived to support them, landing near Åndalsnes and Namsos, but coordination was a disaster. Orders from London were confused, supplies were lost at sea, and German aircraft struck with surgical precision. What could have been a united defense turned into a patchwork of retreat. Still, Norway fought. Farmers turned barns into outposts. Women smuggled ammunition beneath bread baskets. Every village that fell cost the enemy blood and time. The fjords echoed with gunfire and courage. Norway might fall, but it would not bow. In central Norway, the ancient city of Trondheim became the next prize. German paratroopers had captured its airfields within hours of the invasion, but the city itself remained under threat from Allied counterattacks. British and Norwegian forces planned a daring offensive from 2 directions, one from the north, one from the south, to trap the occupiers inside. The plan was bold, but doomed by miscommunication. British troops landed without proper maps or winter gear. The terrain, steep, frozen, and unknown, turned every kilometer into a battle. The Luftwaffe, unopposed, struck supply lines from dawn until dusk. For days, the Allies fought with grim determination, pushing through snow and mud. Villages burned, rivers froze red, and still the Germans held. By late April, the order came to withdraw. The troops evacuated under cover of fog, leaving behind their dead and their disbelief. Trondheim was lost, not through cowardice, but through chaos. The Arctic Blitz had proven again that speed and unity could defeat courage and preparation. For the Allies, it was a bitter preview of France's coming fall. Even as soldiers fought in the mountains, betrayal struck from within. Vidkun Quisling, a former defense minister and admirer of Hitler, seized the moment of invasion to proclaim himself Norway's new leader. Over Oslo radio, his trembling voice announced a coup. "The government has ceased to function. I have assumed authority in the name of order." To most Norwegians, it was treason beyond comprehension. The king denounced him publicly. The people spat his name with disgust. Yet the Germans embraced him. Quisling became their puppet, ruling over occupied Norway with an iron fist disguised as patriotism. His government imposed Nazi decrees, censored the press, and began the persecution of Jews and resistance members. Thousands were arrested. Many vanished into concentration camps. Quisling's collaboration turned the moral wound of occupation into something deeper, a national shame. But his betrayal also united the people. Under occupation, Norway's resistance began to organize, from teachers refusing Nazi indoctrination to fishermen smuggling agents across the sea. The spirit of defiance spread like wildfire. The traitor had helped forge the nation's unity. Narvik, the icy gateway to the Arctic, became the last battlefield of Norway's brief but fierce war. After weeks of relentless fighting, the Allies, British, French, and Polish forces finally pushed the Germans from the town. On May 28, 1940, Narvik was declared liberated. The Allied troops raised their flags above the smoking ruins. It was the first time in the war that Germany had lost a major position. Newspapers in London called it a turning point. Churchill praised it as proof that the Nazi tide could be stopped. But the triumph was fleeting. Just days later, news from France shattered the celebration. The German offensive in the west had begun. Paris was on the brink, and the Allies could no longer afford a campaign in the Arctic. Orders came swiftly: evacuate Norway. On June 8th, the last Allied troops left Narvik. Within hours, German forces reoccupied the town. The victory that had inspired the world vanished into smoke. For Norway, it was the end of hope and the beginning of occupation. As the front collapsed, King Haakon VII fled north with his cabinet. In a small cabin in Tromsø, he received an ultimatum from the Germans: surrender and return to Oslo under Quisling's rule, or face destruction. The king's answer was simple and eternal: "I will not yield to force." When the Germans bombed the city of Nybergsund, barely missing the royal convoy, Haakon gathered his ministers in exile. "If I accept," he told them, "I betray everything this crown stands for. If I refuse, I may lose my throne, but not my honor." His defiance became the moral core of Norway's resistance. When the royal family finally escaped to Britain aboard a British warship, it was not an act of flight, but of survival. From London, Haakon became the voice of occupied Norway, broadcasting to his people through the BBC: "Hold fast. The day will come when Norway is free again." In the midst of conquest, his voice was the light that Germany could not extinguish. When the last Allied ships vanished beyond the fjords, silence returned. But it was the silence of chains. German troops marched through empty towns, their boots echoing off stone and snow. Nazi flags replaced Norwegian banners. Orders were barked in a foreign tongue. Oslo, Trondheim, Bergen all fell under military rule. At first, the occupation seemed orderly. Schools reopened, trams ran, newspapers printed under censorship. But beneath the surface, resentment grew. Soldiers lodged in homes they had taken from locals. Farmers were forced to surrender food to the occupiers. Resistance became whispered, coded, and dangerous. The Gestapo arrived, bringing the machinery of fear. Night arrests became common. Anyone suspected of helping the Allies simply disappeared. Norway's free press was destroyed overnight. And yet, for every act of oppression, there was defiance. Teachers refused to spread Nazi propaganda. Sailors smuggled intelligence to Britain. Even in silence, Norway spoke through action. The occupation was not peace. It was endurance, written in ice and courage. Under German rule, Norway became a fortress of the North. Hitler viewed the coastline as vital to controlling the Atlantic, building massive defenses known as the Atlantic Wall. Thousands of Norwegians were forced into labor, carving tunnels and bunkers into cliffs that had once sheltered fishing boats. Narvik, Trondheim, and Bergen were transformed into naval bases. Arctic convoys carrying supplies to the Soviet Union became the new front, and Norway was caught in the middle. Allied bombers struck German installations relentlessly, turning fjords into firestorms. Amid the occupation, daily life continued in fragments. Children attended school under portraits of Hitler. Families whispered forbidden news from BBC broadcasts at night. The black market thrived, trading ration cards and hope in equal measure. By 1943, resistance networks stretched from Oslo to Tromsø, coordinated through secret radios and coded letters hidden in loaves of bread. Norway had become two nations, one under the swastika and one under silence, fighting in shadows for the daylight would return. The longer the occupation lasted, the stronger the underground grew. From small, isolated acts of defiance emerged a movement, organized, armed, and unbreakable. The Milorg network, supported by British intelligence, began coordinating sabotage across the country. Rail lines exploded in the night. German supply depots mysteriously burned. Even the mighty heavy water plant at Vemork, key to Germany's atomic ambitions, was destroyed by Norwegian commandos in one of the most daring missions of the war. The operation, executed through freezing snow and mountain climbs, prevented Hitler from developing nuclear weapons. The resistance also saved countless lives. Through secret routes known as the Norwegian Pipeline, refugees, especially Jews, were smuggled across the border into neutral Sweden. For many, it was a one-way journey through snowstorms, with silence as their only shield. The occupiers retaliated brutally, burning villages and executing civilians. Yet the harder Germany tried to crush Norway's spirit, the stronger it became. Freedom was no longer a hope. It was a duty. By 1944, Germany's empire began to crumble. Soviet forces advanced through Finland, and the Allies struck from the sea. In northern Norway, entire German garrisons began to retreat, leaving scorched earth behind them. Entire towns, Kirkenes, Hammerfest, Alta, were burned to ashes in Hitler's scorched north policy. When the Red Army finally crossed into Norway, they were met not with resistance, but with open arms. Civilians, starving and displaced, greeted them as liberators. In the south, the resistance rose openly, seizing control of cities even before the Germans could retreat. On May 8, 1945, the swastika fell from Oslo's buildings. Norwegian flags returned to the wind for the first time in 5 years. King Haakon returned from exile to a nation both wounded and reborn. People wept in the streets, embracing soldiers and strangers alike. Norway was free again, but freedom had been paid for in silence. in sacrifice, and in snow. The Fall of Norway was not the largest campaign of the war, but it was among the most revealing. It showed how courage could exist without victory, and how small nations could defy giants. Germany's Arctic Blitz taught the world the new rules of modern warfare: speed, surprise, and domination through coordination. But it also exposed its weakness, the arrogance that believed machines could conquer human spirit. For Norway, occupation had forged unity. The collaboration of a few could not erase the resistance of the many. When peace returned, the scars remained, burned into the mountains and remembered in the hearts of those who refused to bow. Today, Norway stands as a symbol of endurance, a nation that fell but never surrendered. The Arctic Blitz ended in conquest, but its legacy endures as proof that even in the darkest winter, defiance can burn brighter than fire.